Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 6, season 2 of Weighing In, the League of Legends esports talk show. I am your host, as always, Josh, and I'm joined by my constant co-host, Ollie. We are back in the same place today, Ollie. I have moved home with my parents and you are back home as well.
Indeed.
With the whole crazy coronavirus situation, we're going to be here for a while at the very least. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to have a little bit of a break from work. That's basically why I've come home, but decided to probably stay for a little bit longer. So I'm doing good. Got no real work going on right now, so I've got plenty of time to watch all the games, which I mean,
there's very little point in you being at university at the moment, really, and it's the same with me. So I'm saving on my rent and not paying rent by moving back in with my parents, and you unfortunately can't cancel your rent, but no. At least you don't have to buy food.
Exactly. It's definitely a positive.
Although you do have to live under our parents' rules, which might not be worth the extra money.
I don't know. I think it's better than being by myself. I get to spend time with my family, so there's nothing better you could ask for than that, really.
That might be debatable, but it does mean that we have the opportunity this weekend to watch some of the games together, hopefully. Definitely some of the LEC games, although the LCS games are always at a wonk time for us. Yeah. And, you know, it's been good to have all the regions back again and to get some good games. We're halfway through the LEC now already, which is insane. And, you know, it feels like the LCS has been on a lot longer than it has because we only just finished week 2. But they're playing 3 games a week now. So we've seen 6 games out of every team.
Yeah.
Next week, we're going to be halfway through the LCS as well.
Yeah, and it feels crazy, really. I was watching the LEC and I was only realised we were halfway through the split when the analysts were talking about it. And I was like, well, crap, we're already on week 4. You know, that is halfway through the split. And now week 4's over. Going into week 5, this is the time that really matters for the teams. If those top teams want to make playoffs, this week is what really counts, and the weeks going forward. Yeah,
definitely, especially in the LEC where you know we don't have the your standings carrying over to summer anymore. You really have to start picking up. So I think I'm going to be a little bit worried for some of the bottom table LEC teams. However, let's turn our attention first to the LCS, where we might not be as worried for some of those lesser teams, knowing that they have some time to keep improving to make that Worlds qualification at the end of summer.
Yeah, and maybe there's not so much to worry about, but maybe I would argue that they have a little bit more to worry about because teams, you know, some teams are doing really well at the moment, teams we kind of expected to do really well. And the teams which maybe aren't doing so great and are looking to improve over time, their records are going to be stained from this split, and they don't have a chance to kind of wipe that record and then make improvements next split to go on to maybe make playoffs and then Worlds. Yeah. It's going to be harder for them to offset their losses that they've already had this split.
But it looks like so far none of the teams that we expected to genuinely be Worlds contenders do have a really bad record. No. You know, we've seen lots of teams that we were not very impressed with in week 1 but had high expectations for kind of start to bring their way back. And the only 2 teams that are right at the bottom, joint 9th place, is Clg and Golden Guardians. Golden Guardians being a brand new lineup we wouldn't really expect to be a contender. Clg still having some visa issues, although it has been confirmed that Broxer is going to be in for week 3 finally. Which is amazing. I'm sure they're super happy to have both of their imports. And I think, you know, bringing in RJS in place of Pole Belter on that team actually looked really good, and they were able to get their first win this week. Not convincingly, but they were able to get their first win. You know, those are the only 2 teams that I really think you have to be worried about right now, because the others at the bottom of the standings, FlyQuest and Immortals, we've seen some great things out of these teams, right? Immortals managed to take a game off of Team Liquid this week, out of nowhere almost, with a really interesting draft and really interesting playstyle. And I think that kind of leads into my first point, which is it's really hard to power rank the teams in North America. Because everyone is beating everyone apart from CLG, who are clearly the worst team in the league.
Yeah, and I think it makes for really interesting games, especially, like you said, Immortals coming out with a win against Team Liquid, which is something nobody had ever really expected. No one could really predict that, but they pulled it off. And, props to them. And I know, I don't know if it was actually, it seemed like a satirical tweet, but the Immortals account tweeted, maybe teams are going to start scrimming us now, or something like that. And I just thought that was really funny, so...
I wouldn't be surprised if some of the lower down teams are genuinely struggling for scrims. If you think about how many teams are quite competitive at the moment, I can imagine quite a large top tier scrim bubble. I imagine that Cloud9, TSM, Team Liquid, 100 Thieves are almost definitely scrimming together as the top 4 teams. You'd probably throw EG in there as a pretty decent scrim partner, especially because you'd expect a player like Jizuke to be playing relatively aggressively in scrims, which would give people, something a little bit different from what the other top mid laners at the moment.
Yeah.
And then, maybe EG, 100 Thieves are also scrimming with some of the other middle of the pack teams. That leaves probably some of these lower down teams struggling to get quality scrim partners. Immortals, are they going to scrim against CLG? They probably wouldn't be very useful.
No, but I feel like it definitely puts Immortals in a better spot with a win against Team Liquid. Whether or not they're going to carry on that kind of success, I'm not really 100% convinced, but it's great for them. I'm sure that's going to be a massive confidence boost, especially beating one of the teams which is said to be the best team, or at least top 2, top 3 right now in North America. Yeah,
if you just think about it from that morale side, everyone goes home happy after that game. If you win a game against, a CLG, a Golden Guardians, a Dignitas, or a FlyQuest, any of those sort of teams, you're probably, you're happy, but you might not be really coming together. But like you say, if you steal a win, because it was they won the game and they played better than Team Liquid in that game. But if you manage to get that much of an upset win, you go out for beers afterwards. So you bond as a team. That's a memory that you will gain together. You have goodwill to all of them, and that might do really well when they inevitably start to struggle again. Because this isn't a team that we think is going to continue to upset some of the biggest teams. But if they've already got that one in the bank, if they lose to TO the next time, it's not going to hurt as bad.
Yeah.
Because they go, okay, we're 1-1 against Team Liquid now. And they go, that's all right, 50% win rate. We can, take that as a little bit of a momentum boost.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they managed to get this win because, like you said, they just played better in general than Team Liquid, and it wasn't really like a huge comeback or an upset. If you were watching the game from the beginning, you wouldn't have been able to tell that they were playing a team like Team Liquid, and you wouldn't, I think, have been able to tell that it was Immortals because they played a completely different style of league, I thought. And I think this kind of style, they should continue at 100% because lots of the top teams, you see them playing in the same style, like Team Liquid, Cloud9, TSM, they all play this kind of methodical game where they try and control the map, set up vision, get a lead, get Soul or Baron and end the game. It's what they're used to doing, it's how they win the games. And this is what Immortals did in this game. They played their slow, methodical game, they were able to secure objectives, etc. And this kind of style, it's proven to work by these top teams. And a team like Immortals now adapting to that kind of style, rather than just inting, looking for these fights when they've got a lead and throwing. They're playing a bit slower and they're understanding how to convert kills into pressure and objectives and controlling the map and things like that.
Yeah, and I think it shows great signs for the whole Immortals team, not just the players, but also the coaching staff, because it's really clear they came into this game with a plan. Team Liquid played all of their cards pretty much face up, early picking the bot lane, early picking the range top, and I think Immortals almost expected that, because it was an instant lock for the Irelia counter pick. The Blitzcrank coming in right at the end, the last blitz into the Kench to both drag them in and get rid of the shields with the Blitz R. It just seemed like the coaching staff knew that was coming and the players had enough guidance to be able to execute on that really well. And I'm not expecting them to do this every game, because this isn't quite what we expect from a lineup that has some newer and some less experienced players. But if they can, once a week, capitalise on a really good plan with a great individual play, that going 1 and 2 every week is pretty good for this team, who we expected to be 8th, 9th, 10th coming into the season.
Yeah, and especially you mentioned the top lane counter pick with Irelia into the Kennen. I think that was really, really smart, and Immortals were able to hugely capitalise on that with Revenge solo killing Alfari, which was one of the highlights of my week from the LCS.
Absolutely bodied him.
And I mean, that's what you kind of expect when you're picking those counter picks. But the fact that he wasn't scared to go for those kind of engages against such a big name like Alfari, it just proves that these counter picks can work. And no matter if you are quote unquote a worse player than someone like Alfari, which we would say Revenge is, he was able to capitalise on the counter pick and get the solo kill and translate that into pressure around the map. And it was really important, and I think especially with top lane for Liquid being one of their focal points, especially because Alfari is probably the best top laner in the league, the fact that they were able to shut him down so massively gave Immortals such a big advantage.
Yeah, and let's talk now, moving on from Immortals, about another team that we expected to be near the bottom of the standings, but is doing incredibly well, and that's Team Dignitas. This team basically came out of nowhere after going, I think they went 1 and 2 in the first week, to having a pretty stonking 3-0 week, taking down Immortals, the team we were just talking about, Golden Guardians, the other team taking up the 9th place spot, and Evil Geniuses, who have been looking really good so far this week. And I think a lot of that comes down to our main man in the jungle for this team, that's Dardoch, running his A to Z of jungle champions this week, playing the Lilia, the Kayn... No, he didn't play
Hecarim, Kindred.
Hecarim, Kindred and Kayn. Man, what can't this guy do?
Yeah, and he looked really strong on all 3 of those junglers, and the fact that he was able to pick something like a Kayn, which we haven't seen really for quite a while now, by top level players, and I thought it was really impressive the fact that he was able to really go for those solo kills, team plays, etc. on a Kayn, which we know to be like a kind of a solo queue destroyer champion, but you don't really see it in top level play just because of the fact that it's such like a solo orientated champ.
And it was clear like he had a lot of confidence playing that pick, because he picked it into the 4.5 range comp, the half being Gnar, who's basically most of the time in range. Going for that Kayn into a range comp, meaning that you basically have to go blue Kayn, not the red Kayn that we've seen mostly whenever this rarely gets picked. The more aggressive, the more risky build shows how confident he is in his personal skill and his ability to play with the rest of the team right now.
And I thought it was really, really interesting the build he did end up choosing, because he didn't transform until like he was like level 12 or 13 or something like that, which is quite late in all things considered for Kayn. You're looking to kind of get that transformation around level 8 or 9-ish usually. And the fact that he held off on that and was able to still be getting those solo kills before he had his transformation, and then going into blue Kayn and becoming an absolute monster, it worked out really well.
It definitely did, and I'd love to see more from this team, but we do have to preface this 3-0 week and say they did play up against some of the weaker teams in the LCS right now, and that really, although it propelled them up the standings, we might see them fall back down to the middle of the pack, which is admittedly a little bit better than I expected from them so far, coming up to the halfway point. But I don't think you can be necessarily sad about this week. It does mean that they're gonna really have to go back, practice really hard, get into a good mindset going into what's going to be a tough week, because although their first opponent on Friday night is FlyQuest, which isn't going to be the most challenging game, going up against Cloud9 and then TSM, 2 games on the trot, those are going to be 2 teams that will give you a real challenge and could punish Dardoch on some of his more unusual jungle picks.
Yeah, and that is going to be really tough for this team. If they can pick up maybe 1 win next week against something like the FlyQuest, because realistically, coming against Cloud9 and TSM, those are 2 teams who, admittedly, TSM having an amazing week, looking so good, and we'll go on to talk about them in a minute. Cloud9 having a bit of struggles this week, but to me, I'm not really worried about this team at all. So if they can pick up a win maybe against FlyQuest, I think that'll do really good for them. So I'm predicting maybe like a 1-2 week if they can do well, but it's going to really test them. And however they do, I think they're going to probably at least pick up one win. I'm pretty confident in the fact that either Dardog or someone else on this team can pull out one of those picks and absolutely shut down one of these games, because it's what they've been doing recently, like snowballing one champ, getting them really fed, and then they're able to snowball into other lanes, and this has been great success for them this week, and hopefully they can carry on doing that next week. I mean,
I mean, like you said, right? If you go 1-2 this week, you beat FlyQuest, and if you have a strong showing against either of the other two currently best performing teams, I'd argue, in the LCS, you go away pretty happy because you're halfway through the spring split. You've got a positive record. You're pretty likely to make spring split playoffs, and you've set yourself up amazingly to get summer split playoffs, which is the only one that matters for Worlds anyway. Yeah. So you can't be unhappy from a team who we thought were pretty trash all in all coming out of the lock-in tournament. No complaints here from me when it comes to Dignitas. And I think you touched on the next thing that we're going to talk about, who we definitely don't have any complaints of after this week, and that's TSM. Where did this come from?
I have no idea.
Where did all the problems go?
I don't really know. Something must have happened. Like, so either something has just clicked, like the team's finally realised we should stop running it down, or they've been like they've identified what problems they've had, and which is more likely probably, and they've been able to fix those problems in such a short span of time, which is it's really impressive. And the fact that their games also looked really clean and clinical as well. It didn't look like they were just scraping wins. It looked like they had a very clear game plan, which was similar for all three of these games. And for me, it felt like as the week progressed, they just got better and better. And against Immortals, I thought it was TSM's best game in a really long term.
That's definitely a really good point. The fact that they got better this weekend. The Golden Guardians game was by far the weakest we saw TSM in week 2. It was messy, and it really came down to a standout performance from, of all players, Lost on the Ezreal, which is something we haven't seen recently. The man just took over. He was doing so much damage, never getting caught. This seems like a really good style of champion for him. Give him a champion with a little bit of mobility, because it's clear that he has the mechanics to save himself. It might just be the positioning, the communication, the teamwork that's quite lacking from one of the newest players in the LCS. But give him a champion where he can just jump back, and he's got the hands to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that maybe is something that TSM identified as maybe being an issue, because, you know, lots of teams were focusing on that bot side because they knew Lost didn't have the experience, and maybe they could capitalise on that. But now I feel like Lost and Sword Art have a lot more synergy this week. They played a lot better in the bot lane. They weren't really getting massively gapped. In fact, winning lane in their last 2 games. And yeah, it looked like they played a really clinical game, like you said. Lost really stepping up this week. He looks like a completely different player, to be honest.
Yeah, and I loved the Kaiser pick on Lost, because this is a guy who we've seen go really aggressive in Academy before. Sometimes, admittedly, to his detriment, although we see that from a lot of newer players. But giving him the Kaiser against Team Liquid kind of says, Lost, we know you're one of the new players, but we believe in you. So you can press that button and you can go in if you think it's right, and you give Sword Art an aggressive champion to follow up, and you give Huni someone that he's comfortable to go in. He's played the Gnar so many times. And you say, Lost, wait for that Huni ult, go in, you know what to do. And he did that so many times, and it was absolutely devastating, because he would hang back, and then immediately the whole team moved in together, which is something we just haven't seen from this team at all in the lock-in all the first week of LCS.
No, it looks like maybe something's changed with their comms as well, because it, like you said, it looks like we've seen them during the lock-in tournament and week 1 kind of going for really odd plays, the team being a bit split up, not really super coordination from this team, and that looked completely different in this week. And I think either something with their comms has changed. Maybe their shot caller is. I mean, I don't know who their main shot caller is, but whoever it is maybe being able to communicate with the team better, etc. And and especially with their champion picks and their drafts, it allows them to have better comms as well. Because they have, like you said, Sword Art playing an aggressive style support. Sword Art was able to basically say, all right, we're going in, follow me, and they were able to pick up kills, win team fights, etc.
And that's exactly what they brought him in for. That's why you pay the mega bucks for someone who is like Sword Art and is as good as Sword Art. And I think, I wanted your opinion, because I think what I think is the biggest change between week 1 and week 2 for TSM is just the team's direction. Week 1, we saw 3 totally different team comps with different win conditions, and they didn't work. They just didn't, because we go in one game and TSM would do something wrong, and then they'd go to be doing the wrong win condition, focusing on the wrong thing, and they get caught out, and it just looked horrific. But this week, they said, okay, Huni, weak side. They said, Speaker, play towards bot lane, leave Power of Evil. He can basically, if you leave him in a 1v1, he'll be as good as any other player right now in the LCS. He's not gonna get solo killed by a Perks. He might go down and farm a little bit to someone like Perks, who's probably the best mid laner, but he can hold his own well enough. And you say, Speaker, come down, wait for Sword Art to go in, and then we all smash it. And they did that every game, and it looked great. And they did that all 3 games this week.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's definitely something which has completely changed from week 1, and the locking tournament is their direction, and especially identifying that, like you said, Huni is kind of that weak side of the team. Not particularly that he's like doing bad. I think he's playing really well and had a really good week this week, especially on the Gnar. Like you mentioned, he was able to really dominate that lane, and then later on in team fights, etc., had a really good game. And I think, like you said, focusing more on the bot side gives people like Lost and Sword Art, new players, third team, a bit more confidence to make and go for those aggressive plays, and it paid in dividends. Yeah,
it just seems like everyone knows what they're doing. Huni isn't a bad player. I just think that if you don't tell Huni, all right, you are not having any support, jungler's going bot, you can play aggressive, but you've got to be sure that you're not going to get 2v1'd. And he didn't get 2v1 once this whole weekend. Maybe he misplayed some 1v1s, which is okay, and that's what I think you kind of expect when you pick up a slightly more volatile player. But if he knows he's not getting any support, just the things that we look at, and when we see it and we see him inting, he just doesn't do that as much. Yeah. And I think that's so much better. And you pick him a Gnar, you pick him a Gragas, you pick him a Shen, for God's sake, so he can come down and join the bot lane dives when Speaker's going down there. And it looks so much better, and I really hope this continues from TSM. Even if they don't change I don't care if they're a one-dimensional team and we know this is what they're going to do every time. Because one-dimensional teams have won the world championships.
Yeah.
Like, FPX were a horrendously one-dimensional team, but they were so good at the one thing they did that no one could beat them.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to have your own kind of style, because we see that, like you said, from loads of these top teams where they have their style, and they force teams to basically play their game rather than playing into your opponents. So just really having the control over the game, and that's what I think TSM did really well, and I'm hoping they can be consistent with it and have a great week next week and continue that success that they found this week.
Yeah, because like Dignitas, they've shot themselves straight up towards the top of the league right now, and they joined Cloud9 and 100 Thieves at the top, and both of these teams came into the week undefeated, and they both lost. So now we have no undefeated teams in the LCS. We got 2 at 5-1, and we got like 2 or 3 at 4-2. The top of the standings is looking really close. So close that Team Liquid isn't even in the top 5 because they're 3-3 at the moment.
Yeah, I know.
And I think we'll talk about Team Liquid in a minute. But I think what I was really trying to get at is Cloud9 losing their first game to EG, a messy one. relatively messy one, we have to say, but the standout player for that game, for me, was Jizuke. Playing the Azir looked... That's not the right game, I didn't click on it. He's not playing Azir. He was playing the Rise, and he absolutely took over this game. He was dominating, and he was playing the side lanes so well. And he really, weirdly enough, managed to exploit Perks. Admittedly, Perks not on one of his signature champions, instead playing the Galio to support the Camille from Fudge. And, it didn't quite look as good as we've seen Cloud9 in the first week and in the lock-in tournament.
Yeah, and honestly, I would really say in this game there were some massive issues from Cloud9. I think, for one, the Camille had a really bad game. Who's Fudge? Fudge had a pretty bad game, and it just kind of goes to show his experience. I think there was one play where he teleported bot when there was really no need to, because EG had Rise, who was an effectively like cross-map global ult, and they have the top laner who also had TP. They were able to answer that TP in the bot lane really effectively.
The thing was, like, the Galio couldn't even match the Rise roams, which is one of the most impressive things, I think, from Jizuke in this game. And I do think Fudge had a bad game. And we are going to see that. It's just, this is the first time it's caused Cloud9 in the regular season to lose a game. And I think it would take them some time to get used to having Fudge in the lineup and being able to ask him to carry some games.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, especially, I don't know if there's, for me, I feel like when you're on something like the Camille, you're really looking to either split push, gain that lane dominance, that kind of thing. And when you're going for these big TP plays bot, it to me feels like there's some kind of problem with the coaching staff. And although I know C9 have amazing coaches, like they've got Miffy as one of their head coaches, who I have all faith in, because obviously he was Fnatic's coach last year. But it's just, it to me feels like there's just something like, that was a huge misplay, and it's something we haven't really seen out of Cloud9, these huge misplays. And I think in particular, it is a little bit worrying to me to see them kind of having these mistakes happen, and hopefully they can change something around within the team and maybe switch those roles, because I again was really surprised at the fact that Perks was on the Galio, supportive champion, and Fudge was on the more carry orientated Camille. That was really odd to me, because Perks is someone we've always seen as a hard carry, hyper carry, likes to pick these things like Yone and these other champs, not really his style to play something like the Galio. So I was really surprised there. Yeah,
I agree, but we did see it completely flip the next game when Cloud9 managed to take down 100 Thieves. And we had Fudge go back onto the supportive Gragas. We had Perks take up his position on the... Oh, what is that champion called? Man, I'm struggling so much with the champion names. Zoe. Thank you very much. I'm struggling so much with the champion name today. You'll have to excuse me. He took his position up on the Zoe. He hard carried, but the real standout for that game for me was Blabber, taking the Rek'Sai, which we haven't seen a lot this year at all. Excuse me. Going for Prowler's Claw, which is an incredibly aggressive build, but absolutely blowing up people from the sides of 100 Thieves.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone was really expecting this Rek'Sai pick. Like you said, something we haven't seen in a long time. Barely even saw it at Worlds last season. So it hasn't been around for a while, and I think that's something, again, which C9 used to their advantage. People weren't really expecting that kind of a pick. And if Blab was confident enough to play that, and confident enough to really do well like he did, and like you said, a really off-meta kind of build, then I think... all power to them, and I think he did it really well and was able to execute it really well.
Yeah, 100%. It's good to see the team kind of bouncing back and maybe going back to a style they're more comfortable with when they think the games are going to be slightly more difficult. Maybe it's just we saw some early experimenting in the first game this week for Cloud9, which caused them to take a loss. But then they bounced back and win the next two innings. So I don't know how worried we have to be with Cloud9. I do think 100 Thieves played really well in that match, though. I absolutely love the level of aggression that we're seeing out of 100 Thieves. The number of times they've gone for a level 2 dive underneath the bot turret is insane. And they never expect it, but you bring Closer down on the Talia this game, and they get 2 kills. Underneath the turret at level 2, deny so much fun with the wave crashing into the turret, and it was really hard for Sven and Vulcan to come back in that lane and even have an impact in the game. And they really got carried by some of the other members on the team with such an impressive early game move from 100 Thieves, and they do this so often.
Yeah. And I think it's really, like you said, impressive to see them going for these aggressive bot dives, and something we don't really see a lot by teams, especially considering it was such an early dive at level 2, and they were able to execute it almost perfectly, I would say. It's something we don't really see because teams aren't confident enough, and it's not really the done thing to go for a dive at level 2 unless you have that massive lead, someone's really low, and you can easily pick them off. But I think it was really, really good judgment and decision making by 100 Thieves, and that's something that they did really well against Cloud9 in the whole game, was their decision making and knowing when they were able to win these and take these fights and basically just dominate that game. Like I said, they had an amazing game against Cloud9.
Yeah, it really was. The team fighting from 100 Thieves was so on point, and it all came down to that Baron at the end, towards the end of the game. And the only reason why Cloud9 were able to come back into that game and secure that Baron was just because Perks is so damn good on the Zoe, and he was able to dissuade 100 Thieves from taking that Baron, letting Cloud9 secure it after picking up a kill or 2. But if that was basically any other team in the LCS, I think 100 Thieves would have closed out that game. And when you've got such an incredible lineup as Cloud9, you say, we lose that one even if we had an amazing game sometime.
Yeah, true.
But if you take those two teams in that form that they played in that game and you spread it out across a best of 3 or a best of 5, I have to say 100 Thieves might be the better team and might look like the stronger team, especially in that game.
Yeah,
and I think I'd put my money on them to win that specific best of 3 or best of 5.
I probably would as well, and I feel like it's really important to understand that best of ones are basically, well, not a coin flip as such, but they're really whoever gets the early lead, because it once you've got that win, that's it, game over. You don't have to play them again for the week or 2 weeks or however long until you next face them. And it's important to have a real set out game plan for a best of 1, because you can, if you execute that really well, that's going to win your game. But when it comes to best of 3s, best of 5s, teams are going to realise, all right, they tried this in that game, that if they're going to do that again, we'll have an answer this game. And if they try something else, we'll have an answer for that in the game after.
Yeah, I think it's just that the best of ones allow games to be a little bit more coin flippy. But when we look at how good the teams are in the game, not just who won the game, we actually analyse the play. I do think there's a strong argument to say 100 Thieves played better in that game, even if one massive outlier of a play around that Baron play allowed Cloud9 to basically close out the game. And so, I don't know, man, it's really close between some of the teams right now at the top, especially when we consider TSM shooting their way up as well. It's going to be really, really interesting going forward. And we're almost halfway through the spring split already. As we look forward to week 3, we've got some pretty interesting games. It's not the most interesting week, we have to say. But we do have some pretty big top-of-the-table clashes. We got TSM taking on the 100 Thieves, who we just spoke about. That's going to be a really interesting game. It'll be interesting to see if TSM can keep up the plan that they've currently had, or whether the Thieves will be able to change the way that TSM play. And we also got Cloud9 taking on Team Liquid as well. Any predictions for those 2 games?
For the first one you mentioned, TSM versus 100 Thieves, I feel like this might be a little bit closer than people might have expected. But I feel like if 100 Thieves get an early lead, if they get a couple of kills in the early game, get that first dragon, then I don't see them falling behind. just because they had a slightly rough end game against Cloud9, I'm not really worried about this team whatsoever. I still think they, for me, hold a place in the top 3 along with Cloud9 and Team Liquid. That's my prediction. I think 100 Thieves will win this game.
Well, I'll take the other side of it, not just to play devil advocate, but because I think this game is going to end up being a battle of the bot lanes. And we've seen how well TSM have shown that they can play around their bot lane, even with a newer player. And so, as long as they can execute on that plan, I think it'll be really close. But I think TSM might just be able to edge it with some slightly more star power coming out of some of the roles when we look at the support position specifically, looking at Sword Art versus Huhi. And I think Huhi's an excellent player, don't get me wrong, but there are very few supports in the whole world that are as good as Sword Art. And unfortunately, I don't know if Huhi's going to stack up, especially if we can get Sword Art on something like a Pantheon, which we saw him on twice this week. It's going to be really close. I'll take TSM, you're taking 100 Thieves, and maybe we'll have to think of some sort of forfeit for the loser of that prediction. Looking at the other game, Cloud9, Team Liquid. Can I go first this time?
Go for it.
Yeah, it's easy. Cloud9 are going to take this one. I think this is a rematch of the lock-in finals.
Yep.
But this team looks better. Cloud9 only look better, and we've seen Team Liquid struggle this week and in the first week. That's it. That's all I've got to say. I've got no doubts. I think Cloud9 are going to take it. You can predict Cloud9 if you'd like.
No. No, I think Team Liquid will take this one. And the reason I say that is because Team Liquid is this team which, like, they can have these bad weeks, they can have these bad games like you mentioned, but when these games really matter, when they're playing against these top teams, they somehow always seem to pull it out the bag. And that's why I have so much confidence in them. Like you mentioned, that lock-in final where they had, admittedly, a fairly close series against Cloud9, they managed to win it in the end with a fairly convincing stomping game 5 in that series. And that's why I think, like I said, when it matters, when they're 2-2 in a series going into game 5, when they're playing some team like Cloud9, they take those games. And that's why I think Team Liquid will win this.
Well, there we have it. 2 opposing predictions, and maybe we'll have to think of some sort of forfeit, which won't be too bad.
Yeah.
But we'll have a little think, especially having you in person here makes it slightly easier for us to do some predictions and some forfeits if we get it wrong, because I've seen what the guys over on Euphoria podcast have been doing, and that looks hilarious. So we might have to do something like that in the coming weeks, but I think that's all we've got to say for the LCS. Mm-hmm. So moving forward, let's talk about the LEC. And we're actually halfway through the LEC, as we said earlier, only in week 4, which, this is incredible how fast we're flying through. We are going to give our mid-season reflections on our predictions and also talk about who we think are our MVP candidates. Now we're halfway through the split, but let's talk first about some of the games this week. And I think one of the biggest storylines we had coming into week 4 was the fact that we had Schalke 04 go on a 4-game winning streak, taking down both G2 and Rogue, coming into this. And they lost both their games this weekend against teams that we wouldn't really expect them to lose against.
No, and I think it's really kind of Schalke's style to go on these runs where they win loads of games in a row and then they have a little bit of a struggle, which for me it is a little bit worrying to see them lose to 2 teams that, like you said, we wouldn't really expect them to massively struggle against in Australis and the Mad Lions, although the Mad Lions probably someone we would expect to give them a little bit of a harder game. But again, like if Schalke are wanting to go for those top spots, then they can't really afford to be dropping games to teams like Australis. So for me, it was a little bit worrying.
And it's even more worrying than just losing to Australis, because this is Australis with a brand new mid laner who they've barely played. I think they're like 2 or 3 days worth of scrim time, before their stage games, which is nothing in the whole terms of things. And he's a brand new player to the LCS. We've never seen Magi Felix, play in the LEC, and he's a player who we have obviously had a lot of hype around and has shown a lot of promise. And he played amazingly in the game on the Corki, showing what that pick can do. But for a team like Schalke, where you have an Abadage in the mid lane, you would expect so much more from this team. So just consistency.
Yeah, and I thought Magi Felix, like you said, had a really, really good game, and he's someone who I've been really excited to watch in the LEC, because I think he's a great player, just hasn't really had his chance to show his kind of skills yet, and now finally getting his time to shine. I think it's really well deserved, and I think he is going to be a huge asset to this starless team. But yeah, like you said, it's really shocking that Schalke were dropping 2 games this week, and for me, it feels like this is going to be really detrimental to their confidence, etc. Because they're a team who although I don't really know, obviously, but I feel like they're a team who plays a lot off emotions and things like that, and when when crowd and their fans are backing them, then they go for it, they really send it. But when they have bad performances, bad games, it kind of has a real knock-on effect to their upcoming games and games afterwards. So for me, I feel like they might continue to have this bad run of games, and they can't really afford that if they're looking for playoffs.
Yeah, and it would have been so amazing for them to secure the 2 relatively easy wins this week compared to what they've done before, because they would have been able to tie both G2 and Rogue at the top of the standings, with all 3 of those teams at that point being 7-2, which would have been a massive morale boost coming into the halfway point of the spring split. A team that we wouldn't expect to be tying them. That would have been amazing, and it is almost too perfect for them to lose like this, with the way they were on the miracle run last year, the way they turned around a really poor start, going 1-2 and then going on a 4-game win streak. It almost seems like this team is the epitome of a streaky team, and I think, like you said, that has to come down to just how emotional some of the players are, and I don't think bringing in a player such as Broken Blade will have fixed that at all. If anything, it might have made it slightly worse, because we saw him definitely show a lot of his emotions while TSM was struggling in North America.
Absolutely, but I feel like if they can bounce back from this, get their first win next week, then they can go on another streak of wins. But it really comes down to that first game. If they have a bad first game next week and they lose or whatever, if they don't have a real convincing win against whoever they're playing, can't remember who their first game is against next week, but if they manage to against SK, so that should relatively, we would say Schalke are going to take that game. But if they don't manage to do that, or if they don't manage to do that in like a really convincing fashion, I'm still going to be a little bit worried for this team, and even more so after then.
Yeah, I think it'd be very interesting to see if they can bounce back from the losses, because if they don't beat SK in their first game, I don't think there's a way they're going to have enough momentum and enough self-belief to take down G2 for a second time. It just that I don't have the faith in these players to be able to reset overnight and come back. However, if they do beat SK, they go, those 2 games were a blip. Hopefully they can then bounce back and do a really good job against G2. Even if they don't win that game, it would be good to see them put up a fight and actually show that they maybe have a little bit more consistency than we've seen from them so far. A team that is showing a surprising amount of consistency, considering how they looked at the start of the split, is Fnatic. Because they looked dog at the start of the split. Absolutely terrible. But they look stronger every game they play at the moment.
Yeah, and I thought this week was a complete turnaround from the way that they've been playing before. And I mean, we spoke about this a little bit last episode. We were saying they look a little bit like they're playing a bit more cautious maybe, and they're not really going for these things because we've seen them make these mistakes. We know them to be this team which makes these silly mistakes which costs them games eventually. But this week they completely turned that around, and they weren't making those mistakes. And in fact, they were capitalising on the opponent's mistakes, and they were able to have a huge lead really early on in both of these games. And they were able to pretty much dominate both of these games and have two really, really convincing wins, despite the problems that happened in game 2.
Yeah, and admittedly, they are against the weaker teams, playing both SK and XL. These are teams that we definitely need to see Fnatic beating quite convincingly, as they did this weekend, to be one of the best teams in the LEC and be fighting for the Spring Split champion. I just think the way Fnatic did it this weekend is one of the best things, because we saw some massive individual standouts, and I think that is, only epitomised by Bwipo's play, who really struggled in the first week or two of the LEC. But counter-picking the Riven this weekend really showed that this man is back, believing in himself, and he did so well into being counter-picked in the second match against XL. I just think that he's going to be doing a good job, and this is what I need to see from this guy.
Yeah, and I thought, like you said, Bwipo was definitely the MVP for me, especially in game 1 and in game 2. I thought he had really impressive showing. But in game 1, like you said, he was able to really control that game, and especially the lane, top lane, with the counterpick Riven. Something we haven't seen in a long time, Riven. But Bwipo played really, really well, and just to prove that he has really good mechanics as well, which when you think of mechanical players, mechanical top laners especially, you don't really think of Bwipo as someone who is a super mechanical player, although we've seen him show his mechanics before on things like the Volibear, but we've seen him play those champs loads. But playing something completely different and having such success and being able to really perfect out that kind of a champion, it's going to be really scary to other teams, and I think, and now you don't really know what he's going to pick, and this is something the casters were saying in game 2. They were half expecting something completely out the window, and I think that's really important to have kind of an unpredictability, so teams can't really go through your replays and your demos and say, okay, so he's most likely going to play this champion. Having that kind of spontaneous unpredictability really worked in Fnatic's favour this week, and I think it's going to continue to work in their favour.
I have to agree, and I was very pessimistic on this team coming into the Spring Split. I didn't know how the new pieces were going to work together, losing some of the most core foundational pieces of this team. But with these 2 wins, they've climbed themselves all the way up to 3rd place right now with a 6-3 record, only 1 win behind both G2 and Rogue. This is looking better, a lot better from this team. And we're seeing some of the new pieces look really well. I was really impressed by Niski's play this weekend. I have to say, picking up the Seraphine in both games is something that we haven't seen a lot of mid laners do on the pro stage. But I think it worked really well with the team comps, making sure they had enough damage from some of the other roles where you can have a slightly more supportive mid laner in the way that we've seen Niski do, but in a different style that's not roaming. It's not a Galio TF. It's a real, great engage with the ult, buff up the teammates. That looked like a great style, and we know that Niski can always go back and play Galio TF anyway.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, picking up Seraphine for both of those games, he looked really impressive on them, was able to have kind of a more passive laning phase, and then just kind of stack his items, and like I said, play more of a supportive role, working really well, especially when you have someone like a Riven in the top lane, and a Samira in the bot as well, 2 hyper carry champions. And I would also like to speak about Upset, because I thought he again had a really good week, and he's someone we know is a very mechanical kind of hyper aggressive, hyper carry kind of player, and I thought he really shined alongside Hilly this week. Those 2 playing really well in the bot, able to against XL really shine, and that game especially for me was a huge bot gap, and I feel like although Hilly had a really good game, a lot of it came from Upset kind of being able to pull the trigger on his Samira, but yeah, I thought the whole team played just so much better this week. And like Hillisang playing his game, not inting, Bwipo playing really well, Niski playing well, Selfmade doing his bit as well to snowball every lane. and I think it's really impressive stuff.
I do agree. I think that if this team doesn't have some of the individual players make poor decisions, they can look like this every week, and there's not a reason why. We just have to see if the coaching staff and the ethos within the team has moved in a way to, make sure that the players are all on the same page and that there are no poor decisions coming in from one member when the other members aren't ready to follow up. Two teams that we haven't really seen a lot of poor decisions from so far were Rogue and G2. And we saw these two teams battle it up in what was a pretty epic game. Going on for, I think it was something like 50 minutes. Yeah. It was an absolutely epic game. We saw G2 pick a pretty aggressive comp, going with the Echo in the mid lane and the Quinn in the top lane. Two pretty aggressive picks, and they were able to capitalise on an early lead. However, it was so close to coming back with how well Rogue played. I think this game could have gone either way, genuinely. It just shows how great both of these teams are.
Yeah, I agree, and I think G2's comp was really, really smart in the fact that they were able to get an early leads with the Quinn and the Echo and those kind of champs, which really excel when they kind of hit their level 6, hit their power spike, and they're able to kind of dominate their lanes respectively. And I thought there was a point when it started to get into the late game when I thought Rogue were going to come back because their team comp seemed to be a bit more orientated for late game.
It was the perfect classic Rogue team fighting composition. You have the Renekton to be a meatball. You put the Zee in the mid lane. You give Hansama a massive late game carry in the form of the Vayne. They were poised to take the game.
Yeah, and it came down to the wire really with the Baron take from G2 and then securing the soul, and we're able to finish it out. After that point, it's a bit tough for teams to come back, especially with the soul and the Baron in hand. They were able to siege the base of Rogue and take that game, but nevertheless, it was really, really close, and I feel like Rogue were really on the cusp, and I feel like if the game was delayed any longer, I felt like Rogue could have instantly won a team fight and then done exactly what G2 did to Rogue in the end and taken that game.
Yeah, 100%. It is so close. There's not that much to say. I know this is an epic game, but there's not that much to say about it because it was so close and it really was like either of these teams could have won it. If you didn't watch the game, it is a behemoth of a 50-minute game. It really is, and it's not a slow 50-minute game either. I would highly recommend at least watching the highlights of that game because these are probably the two best teams in the LEC. I know we'll discuss that further in a second, but for me, no other team quite comes close, and that was really, shown by how closely matched these two teams with significantly different play styles were. It couldn't have been a better representation of what the two best teams in the LEC are about right now.
Yeah, exactly, and I think, like you said, it speaks to exactly the play style that both of these teams have been playing. We've seen G2 go for these kind of not so much early game comps, but these early to mid game comps where they're looking to close the game out within half an hour. Bish bash bosh, in and out, easy job. But it came down to the wire in this one, and it was really exciting to watch.
It really, really was. Even though it was a 50-minute game, which normally we think of 50-minute games in any region that isn't the LPL as boring. However, this was one of the rare exceptions. So thank God for that. I'm glad it wasn't a snooze fest because it was the game we were both looking forward to so much. We are halfway through the LEC now. So I wanted to reflect on your thoughts thinking about how we thought these teams would come in. Are you happy with your predictions at the start of the split? Any that you really think or like you got wrong?
I can't quite remember what my predictions were, but I feel like I was actually pretty close.
I think we were both pretty close, actually. I think we definitely both had G2 in the top, and I think they've shown they're really good. We've both been impressed by Rogue. I think the team that we were both the furthest out on has to be Mad Lions.
Yeah.
We expected this team to be towards the middle of the bottom, and they've shown significantly higher than we expected. So bravo to the Mad Lions. Schalke have disappointed this week, but we definitely can see them getting back to where they were, and all the other teams are pretty much slotting into position. I had Fnatic slightly lower than you. I had Fnatic in my second tier, but they're doing really well, and I think overall the power level of the LEC looks pretty strong. We've got some good teams. We've got some of the bottom teams starting to develop. Overall, I'd say we were pretty close.
Yeah.
We both had G2 in the top. You had Schalke in the top.
Yeah, I wasn't like super. I don't know why. I wasn't really convinced that Rogue were going to come in and dominate the way that they did, even though being such a good team last season. And I feel like maybe my predictions were more orientated towards like playoffs and how teams are going to perform during the playoffs and things like that. Maybe they weren't so much about the split in general. So we'll have to come back and check these after the playoffs and how teams perform. But other than that, I feel like I had a lot more faith in XL than you did, and they've been a team which has really surprised me and you this season so far.
I predicted XL to be down the bottom. I thought they were going to be pretty pants, and they're actually taking up 5th place at the moment, joint with Schalke. So I'll admit that I was wrong there.
And right now the mid table in the standings is all really close. We've got 3 teams on 5 and 4, being Mad Lions, XL, and Schalke. And those are the 3 teams which. You had 2 of them in your second tier.
Yeah.
I had 2 of them again, but we had a different 2. So, our predictions, if you merge them together, are basically 100%
pretty much
correct.
So what we're saying is, if you listen to about 50-50 of what we say, 50% from me, 50% from you could predict the LEC very easily, and we'd be perfect.
Yeah.
So there you go. We're great analysts.
Exactly.
If we look ahead now, we're going to the second half of the LEC split. We're looking at week 5. This, I have to say, unfortunately, could be a little bit of a snooze fest of a week. I'm seeing so many one-sided matchups. We look at the top table teams, and none of them really look to be challenged. I think the only game that could maybe provide a challenge for one of our top table teams has to be G2 going up against Schalke. They've already lost once to Schalke. If this is twice, it might be a worrying pattern.
Yeah, and I feel like another game which might be quite interesting to watch is the Mad Lions versus XL, which is more of like a mid-table battle. But if either of these teams, whoever manages to win this game, has a really good chance at pushing into the top 4 positions, because there's only a couple of, or literally 1 win between Fnatic and then those 3 teams which are on the same game, on the same score. So
and one win above Fnatic takes you into joint first place. It is really close.
Yeah, and it's really surprising that it is so close, and we're already halfway through the season. And honestly, it's almost scripted, to be honest, because it's setting us up for a really exciting couple of weeks. Although this week, like you said, maybe not the most exciting one.
But I think that's okay. We only got 4 weeks left. If we say week 5, not going to be the most exciting one. The games in week 6, 7 and the Super Week in week 8 are going to be so incredibly important, because the teams are still going to be packed, like you said, really close, all close to the top. Those weeks are going to be so impactful. Every game in the last 3 weeks is going to be so important. So maybe week 5 isn't going to be the best, just because of how one-sided and how you're not necessarily playing against the teams that are close to them in the standings. But the week after, we're back in business, I think, for what could be one of the best spring splits we've ever seen in the LEC.
Yeah, and I feel like this week is really, to me, about that kind of the mid-table teams, because we have a lot of mid-table versus mid-table teams here, mid-table versus mid-table games, and that's maybe gonna start to separate some of those teams a little bit, and we'll see the teams which are a little bit stronger than others, and that's kind of a good thing, because it gives those teams confidence to maybe go for a top 4 or a top 3 and make playoffs, which will be really exciting. And like you said, the weeks coming up, all games are going to be really, really important.
Yeah, 100%. Now, let's look to our final region. Talking about being back in business, it's so good to have the LCK back. Something to do in the mornings. It's a reason to get out of bed just to watch these games. We had a week off last week for Lunar New Year, but they are back and in full swings. And they've got some absolutely brilliant games. This morning we saw what was a surprisingly close 2-1 with Damwon narrowly taking the win over KT Rolster, which I definitely didn't expect. But the 4 other games I wanted to highlight and maybe mine your brain for quick predictions, because I know we're running slightly long on this episode. We've got our Freaka Freaks taking on Genji, with the Freaka Freaks looking significantly better in the last week of competition than we would necessarily expect. DRX and T1 matching up for the second time. Who knows who DRX is going to be, T1 is going to be fielding. It could be anyone, but whoever they field, I think it's going to be really tough for them going into DRX. We've got Honma Life taking on Damwon Gaming. We've got 2 of the best bot lanes in the whole of the LCK, along with the 2 best mid laners. That's going to be brilliant to see Chovy and Showmaker go up, as well as Deft and Ghost in the bot lanes. And finally, we've got Freaka Freaks versus DRX, and I highlight this game because I think it might be the battle for 3rd place. Both of these teams are so close to breaching into that top 3, top 2 position, coming not close to Damwon Gaming, but the tier below them. It looks like the LCK, although they took a week off last week, they just stored up all of the good games, so it's going to be a great week.
Yeah, and I agree. I think this week's going to be testing for a lot of teams, especially one for me to highlight is probably HLE versus Damwon. I think that game's going to be really exciting. We have the clash of the titans, essentially 2 teams, like you said, that with the best bot lanes in the league and the best mid laners in the league, and it's always fun to watch these 2 mid laners battle, and especially it's going to be exciting to see who will come out on top. I predict Damwon to win just because they've been having so much success recently, and I feel like Damwon is still the best team in South Korea and for me the world.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. I haven't really been watching too much LPL recently, but Damwon look a step ahead of any other team in the LCK. They look on world-beating form. Khan is fitting into the lineup so much better. Now he's had some time to get used to the other players. I think this team isn't necessarily going to be challenged too much by any of the teams in the LCK. I do think Honma Life have got one of the best matchups into them, just because they have the strong lanes matching up into strong lanes. The other one being T1, who I think also have a chance, but God knows. It's going to be very interesting to see if anyone can come close to challenging Damwon Gaming.
Yeah, and I feel like you mentioned the LPL. I think the real surprisingly strong team from the LPL right now. I'm not sure how much you've watched, but FPX is making quite a big comeback.
Oh, I have been watching FPX. Yeah, because I love watching Nuguri. I was so sad to see him leave Damwon Gaming, but that man is absolutely popping off on FPX now.
Yeah, and they're having a lot of success with Nuguri in that top lane, and the rest of the team coming back after not making Worlds last year, which was a huge upset to them, and everyone was really expecting them after winning Worlds the year before to come in and at least have a shot at doing well. But yeah, it looks like they're kind of back on track now. So maybe we'll see a FPX v Damwon Gaming Worlds final this year.
That would be absolutely incredible, but that's far too...
It is.
Far too
I'm getting
a long way to think about. I think we are going to be closing out the episode now because we've been chatting for quite a while. I need a break, I'm sure you do too. But thank you everyone so much for listening. Any final thoughts, Ollie?
I don't think so, other than make sure to watch the games which we've highlighted as games of the week this week, because those are going to be... But just watch all the games, to be honest. There's no reason not to.
No. What else are we going to be doing stuck inside? Well, what you could be doing is watching either of us streaming on Twitch. I've been playing some Minecraft, a bit of Hearthstone, and maybe some League. You've been playing quite a lot of Rocket League, which is your speciality. The links to both of our Twitch pages will be in the description, and this show also has a Patreon. Patreon is highly optional, but if you can afford to donate to us, it's highly appreciated. You get your name shouted out in the show and you get to ask us questions, and we'll even break down some of your VODs to suggest how we think you might be able to climb better in solo queue. But like I said, no pressure, and the link for that will also be in the episode description. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will speak to you all next time.